On today's Apple Daily, I have no voice. Apple sues the NSO Group over Pegasus. Russia wants their own Apple headquarters. Apple pauses sales in Turkey. 4nm 5G Apple Modems in 2023. What to expect from AirPods 4? When will the iMac with M2 arrive? Apple Car as a Service. M1 Max Unplugged. iLife Reborn. Thicker repairable hardware. The Next HomePod. AirPods Pro 2 sensors. And M1 POWER MacBooks. That's a lot to get through, so we better get started. I'm Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like the video, subscribe to the channel and ring me bell. And as usual, the tech news drought stops occasionally and you get loads of stuff to talk about. So we've got actually 4 proper news stories as well as your IFK answers today, so let's dive straight in. First of all, Apple is suing the NSO Group over Pegasus. Now the NSO Group, if you're not aware, is an Israeli security research firm that created this Pegasus kind of spyware that could be installed onto iPhones. Very rare thing that you can get any sort of malware into an iPhone, but this was basically used to exploit some vulnerabilities in the iPhone to infiltrate and target the devices of journalists, activists, dissidents, academics, and government officials, and it was used by various different governments around the world. Now, it was a very targeted thing. As reported by Mac Rumors, as part of the announcement, Apple has revealed that it is notifying the small number of users who have been targeted by the forced entry exploit for a now patched vulnerability that allowed Pegasus to be installed on their devices. Apple has also said that it will continue to notify users that it believes have been targeted by state-sponsored spyware attacks in accordance with industry best practices, and now the company has shared a new support document outlining how it will notify those users. So I know there were a lot of people that were concerned that Apple were kind of bowing to different governments and things like that, especially around the time that we were talking about CSAM and the child exploitation protections that were being put into iPhones. There were a lot of people that were worried that, well, what if China decides that they want to put some sort of filter on everything that goes onto an iPhone, or have information about what's on people's phones? I think this is quite telling that Apple is really not okay with invasions of privacy. The way that CSAM was going to work as well was it was an on-device scanning that just checked against a database of existing images. It wasn't checking your family photos to see if you had a picture of your kids in the bath, for example. Hopefully this will allay some people's fears that Apple is kind of controlled by different governments. It's not the case. Apple is actually actively stopping governments from spying on their citizens in this way. Next up, Russia is demanding that Apple and other big tech firms establish physical presence in their country. This comes from the Russian state communications regulator, who is basically demanding that any company that wants to have a presence in its country in terms of technology, so Apple, social media companies, Facebook, Google, the works, will all need to have a physical office in Russia. Otherwise they will face bans, fines, and the like. And they're talking about this happening before the end of 2021, which doesn't give them a great deal of time to get this set up. So don't expect Apple Park 2. I don't think we're going to have a nice UFO campus in Russia. I think we're probably going to be looking at a little corner office in a nondescript building. Presumably this is so that the companies operating in Russia have somewhere to be served legal papers, for example. It doesn't sound like a great thing, but there we go. This is what Russia is demanding. We will see how the tech companies respond, and we'll keep you up to date on this story. Next up in our weirdly geopolitical show today, Apple has temporarily halted sales in Turkey after currency crashes. So this is reported on Mac Rumors, and it looks like Apple has basically made everything on the Apple Store in Turkey unavailable at the moment. The store still exists, however, the currency has crashed ridiculously over the past couple of weeks. Over the past year, the lira has dropped like 45% of its value. Inflation is at about 20%, which is pretty high. So I think Apple quite rightly has suspended sales there so that they actually know what is being spent on their things. I'm guessing if you really want to buy Apple stuff in Turkey, there's stuff like Amazon and things, I guess, but I don't live in Turkey. I don't really know, but that would be my best option. I think Apple is just protecting itself from massive changes in the currency values. And onto something a bit more techy, Apple is planning to start producing 4nm 5G chips with TSMC starting in 2023 for the 2023 iPhone. So that's the iPhone 15? Yeah. So these will be on the 4nm process, which means they'll be more energy efficient. It also means that Apple won't be paying the chip prices from Qualcomm, but just a license to use the patents. Should result in some savings for Apple and probably more efficient chips, which is a win all round, longer battery life, and doesn't cost Apple as much, which potentially means they can put new features in that they otherwise would be spending that money on the 5G chips. Exciting, but when do we see them come to MacBooks? And no sponsor on today's show. Today, I just want to mention again our Patreon page. Thank you so much for the guys that have already signed up, and if you're interested in supporting the show, helping me to kind of keep this financially viable, please feel free to go and check it out, patreon.com/iCaveDave. But let's get into your questions, and the first one comes from Len Adams. iCave answers, given the AirPods 3 look like the original AirPods Pro, will the AirPods 4 look like the Pro 2 design? I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. We don't even have AirPods Pro 2 yet, so we don't even know if they're going to look different. I know the rumours have said that they're going to be stemless, but honestly, if they're stemless, I'm going to be less pleased. I think the stems are quite iconic to the AirPods, and also the fact that they house really good microphones, so you actually get decent call quality compared to most in-ear buds where they don't have a stem. You don't get the beamforming microphones that work as well in general, I don't think. I could be wrong. Let me know if you've got an example of a great microphone fitted to another earbud. Also from Len Adams, iCave answers, when will the iMac M2 come? Now this is an interesting one because I think that even though we're probably going to get the M1 Pro iMacs in March next year, I also think we might well get the M2 iMacs. I think now that the redesign has been done, I think that the chip updates should be a lot quicker. We're expecting M2, hopefully, in that first quarter of next year with the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, but also getting the more powerful chips at the same time, because Apple won't need to introduce the M1 Pro stuff. They can just introduce the M2 and go, and also you can get the larger iMac with either of these. Team Kinetix asks, iCave answers, do you think the Apple Car might be a service rather than a product that you buy and keep? Could it be more like a self-driving Uber that already knows where you live and work, that can play your Apple Music playlists while in transit and charge your Apple Pay account for the trip? And yeah, this is a decent option, I think. I don't know whether Apple wants to enter that market as being a full-on service, but it might be something that is bought by local operators to operate in an Uber style, in a self-driving taxi kind of style, so people could just buy a fleet and put them out to work. Could well be the case. The Crackpot Dad asks, thought you guys might be interested. Today I unplugged my M1 Max from the power at 9 AM and worked on it all day until 5:30. How's that for battery life? That's awesome. I mean, you can do that on the M1s as well, but it depends on what your workflow is, I guess. Are you editing videos, or are you just doing like officey type stuff? Regardless, if you can get a full work day out of a laptop without plugging it in and not being worried that you might run out at the end of the day, that's a pretty awesome thing, especially if you've got the power of an M1 Max on tap. Len Adams asks, iCave answers, will iLife come back for Silicon as the repackage of GarageBand, Textedit and Work? So iLife used to be the suite that would give you iPhoto, iMovie and GarageBand, and then iWork was its own separate package, which was Pages, Numbers and Keynote. Honestly, I don't think they need to bring back the iLife branding, but it doesn't really matter either way because all of these apps are free now anyway. So regardless of whether they bundle them, doesn't make too much difference. Bruce Grubb asks, iCave answers, do you think the right to repair movement will mean Apple to start moving away from ultra-thin Macs, both mobile and desktop? They seem to be moving that way with upcoming iPhones. Yeah, I think that Apple has kind of decided that thin is not the ultimate in anything. The iPhones have started getting thicker. The MacBook Pros are definitely a lot thicker than the previous generation because it's more about the practicality and having that horsepower there than it is about having something super thin and light. I do think part of this is moving away from the Johnny Ive era. I think Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs were both very passionate about thinner and lighter and more portable. But I think we've got to the point now, which honestly happened in phones a long time ago, where actually having the right size of device is better than having a smaller device for small's sake, which is one of the jokes that came up in things like Zoolander. If you think back, the Zoolander movie, they had the tiny little the tiny little phones that flipped open so that you could make a call, because phones were just getting smaller and smaller at that point. And yeah, I think we are moving towards practicality over form factor, but Apple is still keeping everything pretty beautiful, and I love that retro aesthetic that we're moving towards. James Apple asks, Windows wants iMessage on Windows but won't bring Windows to the M1 Mac. The hypocrisy of all of this, and I think Windows is embarrassed by the performance of the M1. iCave answers, I don't think Microsoft particularly wants iMessage. I don't think anyone over at Microsoft has asked for it. I think there are some Android users that want to be able to have the blue mark, and people want to be able to use it on multiple platforms, but I don't think it's Microsoft that's driving it. Is Microsoft a little bit jealous of the way that Apple Silicon performs? Yes, because they're approaching people like Qualcomm to make their own ARM chips, exactly the same way that Google has just done with the Tensor, and that other people have been moving towards. So I think the performance stuff, yes, they would like it. They're never going to be as optimized as Apple chips, because they're not making the software purely to run on that hardware. They're still making Windows to run on whatever pile of hardware somebody assembles in their basement, not tuning it specifically for these chips. And also, they're not bringing Windows to the M1 Mac is more about the exclusivity deal that they'd already done with Qualcomm before Apple Silicon was even on the horizon, I think, from Microsoft's point of view. Josh asks, iCave answers, when Apple makes the next HomePod, do you think they will make it with a touchscreen like an Alexa? That's already here, guys. It's called an iPad. That's got nice-ish speakers. What is a much better experience is having a mount for your iPad and just connecting it to your HomePod in the room, and then you don't need to have a screen on every HomePod. Don't think that makes too much sense. I don't think people care about these Alexas with screens, if I'm completely honest. Len Adams asks, iCave answers, will AirPods Pro 2 get the sensors or not? I think they are going to get some kind of health sensors. We've seen a lot of rumours pointing in that direction. Not sure what they'll be. Could be a temperature sensor, but at the same time, that's something that would be much more useful on an Apple Watch that you wear the majority of the time. I think respiration rate, or something that measures something that you use during sports or exercise, would be much more sensible for something like the AirPods. So yes, probably respiration rate, which actually doesn't need extra sensors. It can use the microphones to listen to your breathing rate. And that would definitely help with things like the VO2 max that your Apple Watch can measure at this point. And finally, Mikey Copeland asks, iCave answers, I think Apple missed a trick with the naming conventions. Calling the M1 Max and M1 Power could have gone with 3 lines throughout their lineup and reintroduced a well-missed name. They could go from consumer to power level. MacBook M1, MacBook M1 Pro, and PowerBook M1 Max. Then Mac Mini M1, Mac Pro M1 Pro, and Power Mac M1 Max, iMac with the M1, iMac Pro with M1 Pro, and iMac Power with M1 Max. This way every Mac has 3 levels for the variants of the M chip, and therefore removing the need to use Pro twice. Yeah, I think Apple has completely dropped the ball on the namings. I'm not sure that this is the right solution to it, because putting Power in there instead of Mac just takes Mac out of the name, and I think Apple wants to have Mac in the name of all the Macs. I see why they do. I don't think the names matter that much, but I do think they're definitely a mess. And this is better than what we have now, I'll give you that. Okay guys, that's it for this show. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.